The current presidential election has dominated the news for the past year. The process of voting for a new president is one of great importance, but a new trend in lawmaking may make it difficult for some to participate in this process. Before 2006, no state required photo ID in order to vote. However, in recent years, more and more voter ID laws have been passed, leading to intense debate over whether or not these laws are constitutional and over how they will affect voters. 13 states require an ID to vote, and many other states ask for some form of identification. While many argue that voter ID laws are necessary in order to prevent voter impersonation and fraud, others are concerned that requiring ID will prevent some from voting, and that the new laws will affect certain demographics more than others. Many people assume that everyone has an ID because IDs are so widely used in everyday life. However, this is not the case. Many elderly, minority, and low-income individuals do not own a valid photo ID, and it can be difficult for them to obtain one. In fact, African American and Latino voters are between 2 and 2.5 times more likely to lack an ID. Texas is one of the states with the strictest photo ID requirements, with about 500,000 people lacking the type of ID required by new laws. Although some states allow voters to cast a provisional ballot if they don't have an ID, they are often required to present a valid photo ID within a specific time frame, varying from state to state. In North Dakota, if a voter doesn't have a photo ID, they will not be allowed to vote. Many proponents of voter ID laws counter the issue of disenfranchisement with the argument that states will provide free photo IDs for those who don't have them. But in some states, offices that issue government IDs hold irregular hours, making it difficult for people to find a time to register. In addition, some states require voters to present a birth certificate in order to obtain an ID. Again, although this may seem easy, some do not have a birth certificate and it can be difficult and costly to get one. This is an important issue. That some have to essentially pay for an ID in order to vote is reminiscent of the poll taxes implemented in certain states after the Civil War. Poll taxes effectively prevented newly enfranchised African Americans from voting by requiring payment in exchange for the right to vote. Poorer citizens could not and cannot afford to pay this price and are thus deprived of one of their basic human rights. One New York Times study estimated that voter turnout could be decreased by between 0.8 and 2.4%, a fairly wide margin when considered on the national level. On April 25th of this year, a federal judge in North Carolina upheld a voter ID law that was passed in 2013. This law not only requires voters to show a valid photo ID, but also decreased the time window for early voting and ended the option of same-day registration to vote. When asked why this new law was necessary, North Carolina State Representative Tom Murray simply stated that the laws were common sense.
And so it's just kind of one of those common sense things that makes sense to 60 to 70% of the voters in North Carolina, and so it's a good common sense policy for our state.
This argument is often used to defend voter ID laws, with the idea that the laws are necessary to prevent impersonation. However, supporters of voter ID laws have little evidence that voter impersonation is a widespread problem. One statistic stated that from 2000 to 2014, there were only 31 documented cases of voter impersonation in the entire country. Most cases of fraud involve either absentee voting or cases in which the elected officials change election results, and most voter ID laws would not address these issues. Another common defense of supporters of voter ID laws is that they were already declared constitutional by the Supreme Court in the 2008 case of Crawford v. Marion County Election Board. This decision set a precedent for voter ID by allowing Indiana to pass strict laws regarding identification at the polls. However, former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, who ruled in favor of the law at the time, has since expressed doubts, calling the verdict an unfortunate decision. Perhaps voter ID laws would be somewhat more reasonable if they affected voters from all political parties equally. However, Democratic voters are disproportionately negatively impacted by voter ID laws, skewing the results of recent elections, and this fact is not lost on those who support the new laws. When asked if he thought the recent passage of ID laws impacted the 2012 election between Mitt Romney and Obama, Chairman of the Pennsylvania Republican Party, Robert Gleason, had the following response.
We probably had a better election. Think about this. We cut Obama by 5%, which was big. You know, a lot of people lost sight of that. He won. He beat McCain by 10%, and he beat Romney by 5%. I think that probably photo ID had helped a bit in that.
So, voter ID, necessary to protect the integrity of our ballots or a danger to our democratic system? Ultimately, you decide, but consider the facts before you do.